Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Rob Moolman, and I'm the Executive Director of the Utah Pride Center, and I am very honored to welcome you all to this post-film discussion of the wonderful, wonderful movie Cured. I want to introduce our panel members, and please, for those of you that are just contemplating sticking around, I would do so. It is a fantastic group of individuals to discuss this remarkable movie. So on my screen, we have Dr. Candace Metzler. Candace uses they, them, and she, her pronouns, and Candace is not only been an ex-colleague of mine here at the Utah Pride Center, but is the current executive director of T of Utah, which is Transgender Education and Advocacy of Utah. We have Dr. Charlie Hoy-Ellis, who is a member of the University of Utah and the College of Social Work, and we're really honored to have Charlie here to bring their perspective. Charlie uses he, him, and they, them pronouns. Patrick Sammon is the director of the film, and thank you so much, Patrick. Patrick uses he, him, and we will talk a little bit about the movie with Patrick. And I'm sorry, Joshua. Joshua Bravo is the remarkable director of mental health and counseling here at the center. Joshua uses he, him, and they, them pronouns, and is one of my colleagues. He's sitting in an office just down the road here. I think that before I begin this meeting or this discussion, something that we do at the Pride Center and are trying to get better at is just an acknowledgement of where we are and the acknowledgement of our land and our elders. And I thought I've edited ours because I think there are two things I want to mention. So I want to acknowledge that we here, certainly in the space that I'm sitting in, are gathered on the traditional lands of the Goshute, Ute, Navajo, and Paiute nations. And I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I also think that particularly after watching this film, I want to remember the work that has been done by our LGBTQ elders, both nationally, internationally, and here in Utah. And I want to pay tribute to their dedication and to the sacrifices that they made that have gotten us to where we are today. And finally, it was something that I wanted to put in, particularly because of the fact that yesterday was National Lesbian Visibility Day, a recognition of the lesbian individuals, and I want to show our solidarity with LGBTQIA women and non-binary individuals in our communities. And I think that that was particularly obvious as part of the leaders of some of this work, and I wanted to thank them. Thank you to Patrick, Mariah, the incredible team at Utah Film Center, and to Patrick and Bennett Singer, your director, as the directors of this movie, hugely appreciated. So thank you so much. I'm going to jump right into it because we've got about 30, 40 minutes. And I'm going to start with Patrick, just because I think that you need to fill us in. Tell us about this film and how did it come about and why this movie?
Sure. Well, thank you, Rob, for that introduction, and thank you to the Pride Center and Utah Film Center for joining forces for this event. It's really exciting to present the film here, and it's been an odyssey to get this film made. I first came up with the idea, I guess, in about the fall of 2014. A friend of mine here in Washington had written a film treatment about the life of Frank Kameny, who's one of the heroes in the story. And the film treatment had a scene with Dr. Anonymous, the man in the mask, because Frank Kameny was on that famous panel in Dallas in 1972 where Dr. Anonymous had to put a mask on to testify in front of his colleagues about what it was like to be a gay psychiatrist. I had come across that story in reading about LGBT history, but there was something about the telling in my friend's film treatment that jumped off the pages, and I thought, wow, this would make a great documentary. And I had met my co-director, Bennett Singer, during the distribution efforts of my previous film, Codebreaker, and so I recruited him to join me, and we embarked on this in the spring of 2015. And one of the things that quickly became apparent was, A, we were surprised no one else had made the documentary before us. There had been an episode of This American Life in the early 2000s called 81 Words, which covered this ground, but there's obviously more story to tell, and so we jumped into it. And the other thing, it quickly became apparent how important this moment was in the history of our community. And we really understood its central importance, because as long as we were classified as mentally ill, then business and government weren't going to do anything to treat us any better. And the internal homophobia it caused as well had such an impact on our community. And so we embarked on it at that point. And the first order of business was understanding who we should be talking to. And, it was clear that a lot of the key storytellers are in an advanced age. And so we just started spending money to before we'd raised any, so that we could capture as many recollections on camera as possible. And so the first person we interviewed, actually Ron Gold, in May of 2015, I called him, and he was 86 at the time. He said, in a grizzled voice, "Patrick, I'm 86. I'm a recovered heroin addict and I don't feel well. So if you want to interview me, you better do it quickly." And so his big personality came across on camera. And unfortunately, he passed away within about 6 months after our interview. But that really amplified the importance for us about the importance of interviewing as many people as possible. And, it took us 5 years to make the film because of research, but also the fundraising. It's really hard to pull all this money together. And we wouldn't have got the film made. We've gotten the film made without support from an entity connected with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the independent television service. So we've just really been humbled, Bennett and I, to be able to tell this story and share it with people.
I'm gonna stick with you for just a second, because you mentioned something that really did affect me in the movie. And you mentioned that moment where Dr. John Fryer had the mask on, Dr. Anonymous. And I'll tell you why it affected me, because of the grotesquerie around that mask. And I think that it was shocking to me to see that, and to think that was, and that's what he had to do. And I mentioned that moment in the journal when the journal is open and it says, "I survived the day," was something that really, really kind of knocked me around. And I wonder if you want to just briefly talk about some of those decisions that you made around the what you left in the movie and what you chose to leave out, and particularly the stuff that you knew was going to be traumatizing to watch. I wonder if you wanted to just discuss some of that.
Yeah, it's we could have made 6 hours on this subject. You give short shrift to some of it, but it's a matter of making really hard decisions. And when we started off pitching this film to people, it's really hard to try and raise money when you say, "I'm going to be making a film about meetings and conferences." And so we weren't exactly sure what kind of archival material we were going to have to tell this story. And we had a great, two wonderful archival producers, Murdu Chandra and Luann Jones, who helped us pull together a lot of this material, which formed the visual backbone of the film. And Bennett and I spent a lot of time on the road. I think we visited about a dozen archival facilities, because not everything is online, not everything has been digitized, and you need to get your hands dirty and dig into boxes and see what you can find. And one of the highlights was our visit to the Fryer collection at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. And Bennett and I uncovered an audio recording of that speech that we don't think anyone knew existed before we discovered it. The society has 217 boxes that were turned over early in the, after he passed away in 2003. And we found a shoebox that was labeled miscellaneous audio. And so Bennett had a tape recorder that they gave us, and for several hours was listening through it. And that really brings Fryer's story to life. I mean, we could have had an actor voice his speech if we didn't find it. We knew we had handwritten notes. And then you alluded to the diary, which was so compelling and such an important moment of his humanity, the sort of fear he had in that moment. In terms of your getting to the meteor question about some of the really difficult moments in the film, particularly early on, where we really needed to show people what this mental illness classification meant and what society was doing, what the medical establishment was doing to our community. And we felt like we needed to highlight that in graphic detail. It was not meant to be gory or gruesome, but we needed to lift the veil and reveal for people the brutality that people faced at this time because of this classification. And I hope that showed people the victims and the effects that this caused, and also doing justice to the people who were brutalized by what happened.
Yeah, no, and thank you. I'm going to move to the other panelists now and ask just a general question for any of you. And really, we all had the pleasure of watching this movie prior to this evening. What is the one or two things that you're still grappling with? I know that there are a ton of topics in my head, and I'm like, what about this and what about that? Might you share just some of the things that you're still thinking about, or that really affected you in watching this film? Candace, maybe? Charlie?
So I'll pipe in here. I think one of the things that struck me was with a lot of the the strife that we have in the community today. I think it's important for people to understand this history, and I think that when we look at where people are at, and a lot of people feel disenfranchised from the system of representation, there's with most groups, there's a lot of infighting, things like that, because I feel like people get frustrated with the system. And what this movie does, I feel like, is help us understand how we got kind of brought together, and the natural process that brought people together to fight for these issues, which at the time were relatively straightforward to most people. And today, our understanding and our awareness continues to grow on a daily basis. And I think that it's helpful for people to understand how we got here, and maybe that can help people understand where we're going a little bit more.
Yeah. Charlie, I'm going to jump to you just because you made that point earlier in our conversation about history, not only knowing our history, but the fact that history is evolving. I wonder if you want to touch base on that.
Yeah, sure. So in 1973, as a result of Dr. Anonymous and amazing activism and organizing and everything that people were doing, the wording around sociopathic personality disturbance was changed and it became sexual orientation disturbance. But so if you weren't distressed by your sexual orientation, and it's really hard, you know, I turned 60 last year, and most of my queer friends, colleagues, and clients experienced some period of their younger life where if they'd been offered a magic pill to turn themselves straight, they would have taken it. Most of them now say, you couldn't pay me $1 million. Those straight people are so boring. But, sorry, my best friends are straight, so. But it wasn't actually until 1980 that gender identity disorder was separated out from sexual orientation. And it wasn't until 1987 that distress from one's sexual orientation was actually finally removed from the DSM. I think it's important to understand the history today. So my research focuses, the focus focuses on midlife and older LGBTQIA adults. And done a lot of research, and we found some really interesting stuff. So we use a life course perspective, which says stuff that you experienced earlier in your life is going to continue to affect you for the rest of your life. So in general, the older adult population is actually less depressed than most of the population. But in our research, we found that among LGBT, older adult, midlife and older adults, 30% are still experiencing significant depression. And so we looked at a lot of data. We're working on one paper right now, and we found that members of the silence generation, so that's the generation between the greatest generation and the pride generation, had a higher rate of opposite sex marriages as a way of camouflaging. And that having been in an opposite sex marriage, but not a same sex marriage, predictive depressive symptomatology today. So even though this happened decades ago, it's still impacting people's lives. And the social stigma that young people are experiencing, continue to experience today, is going to become part of their bodies and their lives for decades to come.
Yep. And we're seeing some of that history that you mentioned continue to be playing out in the bills that they try to run in our legislature here around trans bodies in sport, and particularly trans youth bodies. We're seeing that in Georgia. We're seeing that in, is it Florida somewhere that's just
Arkansas, right?
Is it Arkansas that just signed the bill to say you can check genitals if there's, is it Arkansas or Florida?
The governor of Arkansas, for some reason, actually vetoed that.
Okay. But I mean, the fact that those bills are floating around still speaks to some of the work that still needs to be done. Joshua, I wonder if move to you around your thoughts of something that particularly struck you through this film.
Yeah. First of all, I just wanted to give lots and lots of praise and love to Patrick. Patrick, I was emotional. I'm still very emotional. It hit areas in me that I didn't know I had. I was very angry at the very beginning. I was very frustrated, and I was very embarrassed for the the profession at that time and how they were holding on to this. I was embarrassed for these very elite white men, and I'm so happy to hear this story and to know this. It just inspires me, and I hope that it will inspire other clinicians, other practitioners, and to recognize that there were many steps taken before our time in order for us to be able to do the work that we do. So for me, I enjoyed also how decent and respectful and well-educated the people that that were loud in making a change. But I loved that they were decent and respectful at times, and they were very well educated, and they knew the political and the scientific LGBTQ pulse at that time, and I thought that was incredible.
Well, I really appreciate those kind words, and I think one a recent panel with Dr. Silverstein, he was pointing out that the challenge was to figure out when to be in sort of protest mode, screaming and trying to, cause a ruckus, and when to be sort of in diplomat mode. And, it was the same people in different modes at different times. And I thought that was a really interesting insight about how they helped achieve this victory.
I was struck by the different tactics that they used, and the one of the scenes in the movie where it's at one of the conference meetings and half the conference walks out, but they challenge the other people there to sit down in small groups to experience and be exposed to actual dialogue with happy homosexuals, for lack of a different term at that point. Did any of you consider or think about any of the other actions that they took that was particularly, oh, that's clever, that's an interesting step, or I don't know if any of you have any thoughts on that around their strategy for change?
One thing that stood out to me, and I don't remember if I read this, if it was in the movie or what, but I definitely noticed it in the movie when they were showing the archival footage of some of the demonstrations, and Dr. Kimeny insisted that women wear dresses and high heels and men wear business suits and ties. So kind of just putting on that different drag to appear more typical to the quote typical population. I think that was an effective, a small but effective way so that those crazy homosexuals don't really look all that crazy.
Candace, you leaned in there. I just want to make sure I don't cut you off.
Yeah, no, I thought it was interesting how people not only realized how to humanize themselves, but also to not make it convenient, right? To not make discrimination an easy process for folks to just continue to disregard the impact of their actions. And so I thought that way of humanizing, when you talk to someone face to face, and I've certainly experienced this in conversations with some legislators, it changes people when you humanize a situation, when it suddenly is a human being sitting in front of you and not the stereotypes in our ideas. It seems that in most cases that it's easier to break down barriers. And so I thought that was really effective, and it's something we still use today. And I couldn't help but chuckle because we still have the same kind of struggles around how to humanize ourselves without sacrificing our character and who we are.
I agree, and I think that therein lies the challenge around our work, and particularly the work in the queer community around, what do we give up? What drag do we put on? I love that, Charlie.
Yeah.
To move into different spaces to affect change, and why should we? It gets really frustrating at times to think about, why am I putting on this drag just to appease you, who does not like me anyway? And I think that is often really difficult. One of the points, and I was just looking at my quotes here, but I love the point that was made around, we sometimes try to protect institutions who would chew us up and spit us out. It was a point and a quote that came straight out of the movie. And again, I thought, oh my goodness, I've worked in schools, I've worked in other spaces And that's what it sometimes feels like, is that I'm putting on this drag to keep you all happy, but if given the choice, you wouldn't even allow me in the room. And that is sometimes really difficult, but that again is how they affected change. They used the structures of the APA. I love that they started voting in people and was like, well, if you want to play this game, we can play it too. So
Right.
go, you know? Yeah. One of the things that, and I'm just going to, while we're talking about creating change, and particularly because I do want to get this question in, and Joshua sort of alluded to it a little earlier, is the very distinct whiteness of the activists. And, when I kept looking at the pictures, and I think with our current thinking and our current mentality on who's not at the table and who we're missing out on, one of the group, or two of the groups that I felt were particularly invisible were the people of color in that community and in that time. And I know we can discuss some of that history, as well as some of the trans community members that I did not see anybody recognizably identified as a trans individual. Has the queer community gotten better at working across identities, or are we still stomping through those same old tropes of, well, we're going to do this over here and we can do this with these people and we can do this with these people? But do you think we're getting any better at working across identities?
I'll let someone else speak to the present day, maybe who's more involved in the present movement for change. But I think, the reality of I think the situation at the time was reflected in the recollections of Reverend Magora Kennedy, and we're really excited to find Reverend Kennedy. I think her perspective added so much to the film. As someone who was involved in the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement and the fight for LGBT equality, and she could really speak to some of the intersectional challenges. And she taught, and this is the thing when you have to cut things in making the film, she talked about some of the discrimination she faced from other activists in the gay liberation movement. She talked about the homophobia she faced within the Black Panthers, which she was an original member. So it was, it was a reflection of the time, and it certainly, was a big issue, the discrimination at the time, and obviously is today within our movement. And I think we all need to be challenging ourselves about how to include. And I think one of the things that the film talks about is allyship. And I think we all, as a gay man, I need to be thinking about how can I be a better ally for the trans community, and continue the fight that has to be done, and the targeting that's happened in state legislatures, but also among our fellow citizens. So for me, I hope one of the things that comes through in the film is the importance of allyship at this moment in history, back then during this fight, and hopefully that can inspire us to be all better allies today, so that everyone in the LGBTQ community can be treated equally.
Yeah, I saw Charlie pop off the mic, and Candace, I don't know if you wanted to just add something there. No?
Sure, I'll add my 2 cents to this. So I think it would be hard to kind of generalize, because I think in some areas we're doing better, and some areas we have probably more work to do. I am certain there are a lot of people out there that would say, across the spectrum, different places we're doing better, and for some people we got a long ways to go. I think the important part for us to recognize is that piece of trying to remember to look for who's not in the room, who's not getting a chance to speak, and just recognizing that having a seat at the table does not necessarily mean that people are going to listen to you. And so we have plenty of work to go. We've made a lot of strides, and I think there's a lot of amazing people in this community that want to keep working towards that end.
Yeah, thank you, Candace. Thank you.
I agree with Candace. In some areas there is improvement, in other areas we still have a long way to go. I think one of the areas where I'm particularly interested is intergenerational programming. So we have our LGBTQ elders who have this wealth of historical knowledge and experience and wisdom, We have younger LGBTQ community members who have, passion and drive and see the world through newer eyes, but very rarely do the older and the younger generations really come together in any sort of meaningful way. And I think if we could continue to promote that in that process, we might also more effectively start addressing the ongoing racism, sexism, classism, all of the other isms within the LGBTQ community, so that we can all work better together.
Great.
Well, it's good you say that, Charlie. One of the goals of our outreach campaign, which we've been fortunate to line up funding for, is to use the film to spark intergenerational dialogue. In fact, we have a Zoom conversation tomorrow with a potential partner in that effort. So we're excited because we really think this film is a great way to bring together, the people, the elders who help bring our movement to where it is with the younger people working today to finish the fight.
Yeah. It's also a great plug for community organizations that have a SAGE, because they do a SAGE table where that work happens. It might be a great place to show the film with an audience of intergenerational individuals. And thank you to both of you for those points. I'm going to jump to Joshua. As one of we've got three wonderful mental health experts here on this call. What do you think the current biggest challenge is in psychology or queer affirming care at this moment, or in your work? You mentioned one a little while ago, but I wonder if you might want to talk around some of the challenges of being a queer affirming, LGBT affirming therapist in Utah right now.
Yeah, that's a great question, Rob. I have a lot of conflict with that. I sometimes feel that as practitioners, we can definitely learn from the folks that we're supposed to be treating. I think a lot of the times we don't stop to listen and to pay attention to what's being said and what's not being said in the room. And I believe I'm going to, share with you, we have individuals in our communities that have autism, ASD, and we tend to think that we know everything about it. And that if we just read the books and if we read the journals, that we'll be able to better treat them. But we hardly stop to talk to them and ask them, how is this working for you? Or what do we need to do differently in order to be able to better, to better understand what the issues that they're currently struggling with. So that would be one of the things that I would say today, is to be able to really listen and to pay attention to what is being said and what's not being said in the room.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any Candace, I know your work is obviously also in this field. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges in this space?
So I think one of the interesting challenges that we're facing is that we have a hodgepodge of care that's been put together and assembled within a system that really isn't designed to support a lot of non-binary, trans experiences. And I think gender diversity as a whole, when we look at the progress statements put out by the APA and different organizations that make clear their stance on affirmative care, we don't necessarily see that trickling down into the field. And so we have a lack of really clear guidance, and we don't have really good parity between our policies and what we see out in the field. And for example, my research for my PhD specifically looked at Utah mental health clinics. And when we look at most of those clinics, we're still requiring people to come in and essentially go through a hazing process just to access care. And so for an individual who maybe has a name that is really uncomfortable for them, the process of going and getting care might mean I have to go in and be referred to over and over again by a name that I'm actually trying to address. That's part of the problem. I'm coming in for care. And so not only do I have the prospect of coming in and having to use a name that I'm uncomfortable with, but I also have to describe myself to a binary system of confusing kind of language between sex and gender. And so I think for a lot of people, when we look at the fact that for trans individuals, we see a large amount, or roughly around 30% of people that are avoiding care, we could address a lot of that simply by just bringing visibility into our clinics, and in Utah, that's really badly needed. I can at least say that much from my research. So,
yeah. And I think I want to jump to one quick question before I tug on the rest of that thread, because that's where I want to end it, because it's where the movie sort of ended, around the work that's still to be done in the DSM. But we do have a question from one of the viewers, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss that. So one of the viewers have asked us about your thoughts on the impact of the APA outside of the US. What kind of impact outside of the US did the APA's decision have, if any? And if none of you want to take it, I can talk to you about South Africa. But yeah.
I guess my sense in the research we've done and the people we've talked to, it certainly did have an effect because of the influence of the APA, and it was the biggest, was and is the biggest psychiatric organization for members around the world. So the short answer is everything we've read and we're told is it did have an impact in other similar organizations around the world.
Yeah. And, as somebody who lived a squillion miles away in South Africa, I know that our South African therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists still use the APA's DSM, and that some of my earliest childhood experiences were still, as a result of some of the stuff that had come out of the DSM, and that was impacted in our very strange life in South Africa as queer individuals and queer young people and then queer adults. So yeah, I think that the significance of the APA decision was felt globally, and I mean, we saw that at the same time as the Hawaii conference, they were also having the New Zealand and Australian conference as well. So it was interesting. But Candace, I want to jump back to ask yourself and Charlie and Joshua about where you see the next work going. What is the work for the next 5 years? And you alluded to the importance of work on trans and non-binary identities within the DSM. And Charlie, I wonder if you want to kick us off with some of what your thoughts are on the challenges to the APA going forward.
So I think it's important to keep in mind that parallel with the medicalization of homosexuality and then later gender identity disorder and still today gender dysphoria, the medicalization of people as mentally ill occurred in tandem and interlocked with the legal and political system criminalizing homosexuality, gender identity, not atypical gender expression. And so we still see that today. So everyone thought when marriage equality passed in 2015 that, okay, our work's done, everything's going to be hunky-dory now. It's still legal to discriminate against LGBTQ people in some 30 states. And so that isn't changing. I think one of the challenges that we may have, and I saw a very similar backlash. So I was 16 when Anita Bryant came on the scene to Save the Children, and then the oral majority, conservative majority backlash. And we're seeing something similar right now with these political, religious liberty laws. I think there's something over 100 of them in various local and state senates right now. And so any right that can be gained can be stripped away. So I think that's one place where we need to be thinking about doing our work.
Cool. Candace, over to you, and then Joshua, just for your final thoughts on where we're going.
You bet. I think one of the bigger challenges we have is just acknowledging the diversity that is part of the human experience, right? So when we look at the diversity around sex development, when we look at the diversity around gender identity and the system that is continuing to exclude those groups, we see an incredible film like this that helps us understand that as Charlie said, even as we gain control over systems that have been discriminating against people, that have disenfranchised people, that people are moving on. So now they're moving to a political system to try and gain control over what people have in terms of access to medical treatment. And so I think we have to, as Charlie said, I think the challenge is to push ourselves beyond binary thinking and binary solutions for humanity that is not a binary species. And so, getting people to recognize that and getting our policies in line with that reality is really what I see as the biggest challenge, and then dealing with the repercussions on the other side.
And Joshua, do you want to give the last idea to Patrick as Cured Volume 2 for his next movie, perhaps, on what else he should be researching going forward?
Yeah, for sure. I think that we should consider treating bigotry and treating discrimination. That's the illness. We need to look at people as humans, and to start with that. I like the idea of making sure that here at the center, and for each of us who are here as part of this panel, is to make sure that that we are doing everything we can to put the word out that affirming therapy, inclusive therapy, trans-friendly therapy is where it is. And we need to see more and more of our colleagues to embrace affirming therapy, because they have no idea, for those who have never worked in the field that we have all worked in, they have no idea whether the person in front of them or how they identify. And so I feel that that's something that's very important. But yeah, Patrick, I definitely feel that having a film that touches on topics of treating bigotry and discrimination would be the way to go.
I love that. We'll have to talk to the APA about adding that to the DSM.
I think there you go. If you need something from Utah, that's our gift to you.
Well, as we wrap up, I just want to plug the film that's going to broadcast nationally on PBS this October. You can see the social media handles behind me and follow the story about when it's going to be on. I really appreciate all the kind words all of you have had about the film and the great discussion tonight, connecting it to the work that still needs to be done.
And Patrick, thank you to you and your entire team for this movie, you and Bennett. As we conclude, I just think that it would be remiss not to honor and acknowledge all of the people who have brought us to where we are today, both in this film and in our communities. Those who are visible, like the people in this movie, those who've been invisible but have led change in so many different spaces to improve our queer experiences. So thank you so much to everyone for this evening. And we look forward to continuing to watch the film, to seeing it where it goes, and hopefully to the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.